Hey guys, want to do a podcast?
Yeah, I think so. Let's see if Nukin's around. Are you up?
Hey, I'm here. Hold on a second. I got an important inbox message.
What?
500 crystals?
What?
Wait, how did we get these?
What does this mean?
Hold on. I think this was given to us from CG for enduring territory wars. Thanks for $4.
$4? Wow, thank you so much. They really love their client base.
Don't spend it all in one spot.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of SWGOH in Depth. As always, I'm your host, Knotty Karate, and I am joined by Nukin and Avinash tonight. And we're going to start this in the vein of the Shattered Order guys and talk about, what are you drinking tonight? Nukin.
I am drinking some Greek coffee. Actually, I'm sipping it because it's hot. But yeah, just up late doing this podcast. Let's get it down.
All right, Avinash, what's in your hands?
I've got a big cup of water, and I know that's just horribly exciting. I did have a bag of chips earlier, but I didn't think it'd be appropriate to be opening them and eating it on the podcast.
Yeah, good call. I'm drinking aloe water. It's got like chunks of aloe plant in it. I love it. So obviously there's a lot of new news that we have to discuss. Much of it has to do with the Sith Raid, obviously. There's been a couple of other changes to territory wars and some Jedi training Rey stuff we'll get into later. But the first thing we wanted to bring up was what we've learned in the past. Actually, Nukin, how long has the Sith Raid been out? Less than 2 weeks? More than 2 weeks? Okay. So what we've learned in that time is depending on the total GP of the roster of your guild, the total rosters of your guild. If you're over about 100 million, in the range of 100 million to 200 million total, the tier 5 seems to be pretty appropriate. The tier 6 is doable at 120 million, up to 140, and it seems like the heroic is, especially since the changes we'll discuss later, is a little bit out of reach for anyone that's not over 140 with significant active participation in your entire guild. But in any case, what I've been working with my guild, which is a little over 120 right now, is do we choose a tier 5 or a tier 6? And one of the answers is, which one can we complete faster? If one takes 3 to 4 days and one takes 4 to 5 days, the number of tickets that we accumulate can be wasted. So essentially for relatively the same gear, and there's no gear 12 pieces in the tier 6, but you only get 2 of each, so it's kind of a wash. What's your experience been, you two?
Well, our guild originally started off with a T6, and I was like really not that impressed. We did finish it fairly quickly, although the health is really high for that. In my other 2 guilds, one of the guilds that I'm a guild leader of, I'm at 79k in that one, and we're running a T4. It seems to be going pretty good, but I think that's because of the help of my alt. That's a 3.1 million GP alt, and that seems to be really helping them get through it. Although I think the average in that guild is around 1.7, 1.8 at the very most, and they're doing very, very well, and they're finishing it up very quickly. I would estimate about 3 days that they're able to get this done. My other guild, that I am running a T2, which is a huge mistake because that guild is only 13k, and I should have been running a T1. And even then, it would take us a while to do that, because right now, whenever it was, we've been on it for about 2 weeks for a T2, and we just reached the 3rd phase.
And then in your main, in Coruscant with Nukin, you two, how many heroic completions have you done so far? And
3.
Do you think 3 total? Okay.
We've done 3 heroic and 2 T6 when we first started.
Okay, so specifically, most of the information we're going to share, because we did want to go into the tiers that everyone is working with, what's appropriate for GP levels. But for the rest of this, we're going to be speaking from the experience level of T6 and heroic phases and how those have affected, because that's kind of our experience levels mostly. Avi, you have a broader range of experience having many accounts to run and multiple guilds. But let's go into some of those changes. Nukin, can you take this one for the Sith Raid fixes that we just saw? Quote unquote fixes. Can we call them that?
Nerfs? Nerfs, bugs, fixes, whatever you want to call them. I do want to add that basically to wrap up the tiers of the raid conversation, that the lowest I've seen is around 140, low 140 million, clearing the heroic raid. And that number will actually go down as we get more sophisticated teams, lineups that can do more damage, and potentially, eventually, we'll get probably a gear increase or a level increase sometime, probably later this year. Not sure when, and that will also make the raid much easier as well. So that number will go down overall. But the main thing is, don't waste your tickets. Don't overshoot what your guild strength is, because the next tier up rewards are not worth like wasting 60,000 guild tickets or something like that.
Yeah, especially if it takes over a week to complete something, you know?
Yeah. So going on to the Sith Raid fixes, we have Han, Stormtrooper Han. There was a team that was involved with him and either a Darth Vader or a Asajj Ventress lead, and that is now kaput. They quickly kind of botched that and decided that for the health and the integrity of the game, the developers thought that having a team that could do 2/3 of Phase 4 and the entire Phase 3 with just a few teams was just not good for a raid that was designed probably for us to be grinding for the next 6 to 12 months. So that has been changed. Then they also on the forums listed about 15 or so characters that were going to be changed with their interaction with bonds of weakness. So one of the main ones that's very controversial is Death Trooper. And so his death mark has been untouched. And I hopefully I played a role in that because I was talking with the developers about him. But his interaction between him, Director Krennic, and Darth Traya are no more. But the interaction was occurring when bonds of weakness would damage Director Krennic, and through Death Trooper's unique Krennic's Guard, he would gain a bunch of turn meter. In fact, he would be gaining so much turn meter that he could actually reapply Death Mark before Death Mark expired. So it's pretty strong. I made a video on that, but that is no longer the case. They changed that. But it's interesting that some characters were not touched. So like Fives and Asajj Ventress's leadership, that still works. That interaction with bonds of weakness and some of those characters are still there. So that's interesting that, Death Trooper made the cut and he was flagged, but other characters were not. Some other changes.
Nukin, I have a question.
Yeah, what's up?
So we were talking about the Stormtrooper Han thing, which I had 2 opportunities to use and get to enjoy before my iPad crashed. And I had to start over and, kill it early.
Yeah.
When Han was giving turn meter to everyone else on the team, is that viable at any tier for any guild now as a team composition where you would use Han as who's the login character this month? Or is he gone? When you say kaput, I just want to...
I want to say, well, first of all, the bonds of weakness is gone. So Phase 3 and Phase 4 Han ST viability is gone. So you would probably use him in Phases 1 or 2, potentially. But as a kind of like a vanilla-like character, he is not very top tier right now in any sort of aspect. He's on niche teams. And so I would argue that you probably won't be getting a lot of value out of him anymore. And that the value that you were getting with him was through that sort of cheese team that was changed. So that's that with that. And then the other changes are exposed damage was cut in half. So we have normally exposed damages in arena about 20% of a character's max health, but in the raids it was greatly reduced because of the higher HP numbers of the raid bosses. So it was at 0.0004 and now it's 0.0002% max health damage. So that was kind of a controversial change as well. And to kind of compensate for that change, the phase 1 phase HP was reduced by 5% from the heroic tier all the way down to tier 1. So those are some of the changes that the developers made within the first week or so of the Sith Raid.
So they only reduced the HP of phase 1 and not
just
the other
phase
phases?
1. Yes. I think they reduced phase 1 HP because it seems like the best phases to run a Jedi Training Ray Resistance sort of exposed team was actually either phase 1 or phase 2. And right. the change in the reduction of the HP in phase 1, and they fixed a huge bug in phase 2 with Darth Sion. Darth Sion was reducing all of your characters' turn meter down to 0% no matter the cycle of pain and suffering stacks.
Oh, that was terrible.
Yeah, it was difficult, especially because, well, as we'll get into later in the podcast, phase 2 seems like is one of the phases where you're just sending a ton of different teams and you're basically getting all your teams reduced to 0% turn meter right away. So I think some of the bug fix and the reduction of the phase 1 HP is to sort of compensate for the cut in exposed damage there. But those are some of the fixes. I don't agree with all of them. I agree with some of them. It's pretty controversial for sure. But yeah, those are all the fixes that were made.
And even now, do you think is Jedi Ray still the shining star of this raid?
I think so. And
even after the changes?
I'm working on a video right now, actually, testing out Resistance finally. I didn't want to do it until the change, and they're still killing it. You can still get 3 million plus scores in the heroic tier phase 1, which is very good. So that's more than 6%, which is amazing. And yeah, they're still great.
Oh, so then there's hope.
Well, it's very good to know that Rey is definitely still viable, if not the reigning superstar of the raid, because her event is back now, which on one account I've been struggling with when I got last time around. And since it was only 3 months ago that she showed up at the first opportunity for people to unlock her. And people are wondering right now, does that mean potentially that she will return in another 3 months? And is the panic farming worth it if you don't have the vets or if you don't have the gear on the characters? We do have, actually, we'll include a link for the panic farm calculator. And what do you think, Nukin? Is that even a viable proposition that she might be back in 3 months?
I think that there is a strong likelihood of her returning every 3 or 4 months. That seems to be the new cadence for at least her, maybe not all heroic journey characters. So I think that's probably going to be, what we're in March now. So April, May, June. So around the summertime, she should probably return. Is she worth kind of going for it now? That's kind of up in the air. Right now, it's still way early in the raid. And so not a lot of the sort of long-term Sith Raid teams have been discovered yet. So right now she is kind of the top dog, but I think the Resistance team will still have a place in the Sith Raid in the long term, but maybe she'll be dethroned later on in the year. So is she worth wailing out on if you still don't have the veterans? Shame on you if you didn't finish them. So that'll be like a lesson, actually, to pause for a second. If you miss acquiring a heroic journey character or a legendary character, make sure that you finish up those characters so you're not really surprised and you don't have to panic farm twice for the same character. So and the reason that she came back leads me to believe that we'll probably have another few heroic journey characters later this year. And usually, they're going to return, multiple times. And so, for example, we'll use Ray as an example. I did not acquire Ray the first time around. I didn't really even want her, to be honest. And I ended up having 6-star veteran Chewbacca and Han, also nicknamed Viagra Han and Chewie. And I stopped there at 6 stars. And then recently, about a month ago, I decided to start grinding the veterans again. And I thought the event was going to come back in April, May. And I thought that I was, ahead of schedule. But here we are. Jedi Training Raid Legendary Heroic event is here. And I'm not even ready on day one. So, I think that it's good to probably try and wrap up the characters, or at least get them to a point where you're not going to be panic farming. So maybe you stop at 50 out of 100 on the veteran shards or something like that. But yeah, I think that she's still going to be viable in the raids. I don't know if it's really worth it to whale out on her, because this is the second time around. If you're ever going to whale, maybe you want to do it on a brand new heroic journey character potentially. But right now, she is very appealing because of how effective she is in the raids. And you could argue that investing in this character will help you acquire more rewards over the next 3 or 4 months until she returns, and kind of pay off that investment. And the calculator here, the panic farm calculator that we have linked here, is very good. It was actually created to basically plug in where your stars are on your veterans and how many shards you need to the next star. And it'll kind of predict how many crystal refreshes and whether you need to buy shards from the shipments, and kind of gives you a prediction of what the damage is basically to getting these guys to 7-star.
Well, I can definitely attest that, because I've got like 2 very high accounts. On my main account, definitely I was able to get Jedi Training Raid a first time around. And I did kind of wail out on her at the time. My second account, or my alt, is just got the Jedi Training Raid. And that's definitely one that I'm not going to wail on, because I don't feel it's necessary. The Chewie and Han were already 7 stars, luckily, when it came up.
What gear level were they at?
Gear 6. They're at gear 6. So I did have to get some gear to be able to put on them. And I had started off with gear 7 and then tried to do the event, and it just didn't fly. So I had to get them up to gear 9. So I did have to put a little bit into it to do it. And luckily I did save some gear, but not quite enough for it. And I was able to get Jedi Training Raid, but I don't feel an obligation to get her all the way up to, say, G12 at this time. I've got plenty of other tunes to be able to do well in the Sith Raid.
Yeah. When she first came out, she definitely had a reign of domination for a couple of months. Pretty much until Palpatine's rework came out. But yeah, she's still well worth it at this point in the game. Unless someone really desires to acquire her, it's probably not worth stressing out too much, just preparing for. I think that was a great comment, Nukin. That's exactly how I treated Thrawn first time around. Is, well, at least I know how to prepare from a free-to-play perspective next time around. And it's very important to focus ahead. You usually don't fall too far behind anyway doing that. So anyway, we've covered the fact that Rey is still good. Let's break down the phases of the Sith Raid, because this is really the meat and potatoes we wanted to get into. Nukin, can you start us on that? Let's go to phase 1, because I'm still struggling with each phase and all the details of them. It's a rather complex event.
Sure. So in phase 1, you face a Sith Assassin, Sith Marauder, and Darth Nihilus. And something that seems to be effective against Darth Nihilus, now he's a pain. He can do damage straight through protection, straight to your health. And so being able to dodge attacks seems good. So if you're ever going to run an evasion-led team, phase 1 seems like the place to do it. Some other teams that are interesting to run are the Zader damage over time, the Dot Squad. So if you're ever going to run a Zader-led team, phase 1 is a good phase to do that as well. Keep in mind that when you're running this type of squad, that debuffs are not going to stick unless Darth Nihilus has immediately taken a turn, because every time that you hit Darth Nihilus, he's going to get stacking tenacity 50% per attack. So make sure that if you're trying to run this team, that you're trying to at least attempt to land your dots right after he takes a turn. Speaking of more of like a debuff, thermal detonators are pretty effective as well. And so there has been a recent team that involves Jawa Engineer and Zam and Bodhi Rook and Jin Urso. It's a weird kind of squad.
Well, Bodhi's on that team too?
Yeah, right? What kind of world are we living in? Bodhi Rook.
Oh my gosh, I totally forgot his character.
But thermal detonators have been effective. Basically, you're just kind of giving turn meter and calling Jawa Engineer to assist and trying to land a bunch of thermal detonators. And that's an effective team. But the best team actually is Resistance. Resistance, they do big damage still, even post-exposed change. And the ability for them to gain foresight a bunch is allowing the team to go the distance in the heroic tier and make it to the in-range with not any of the characters dying. And so that is good. And the flexibility of the team is also great. You can run even 4 resistance characters and then actually put, characters like Zeta Barris, or you could run a Visas Mar or something like that. So you don't even need to run 5 resistance characters. But yeah, Jedi Training Array resistance team works. And
Are you talking about a Fin lead team as well when you say resistance team? But you're talking about Ray specifically, not 2 resistance teams, right?
Jedi Training Array resistance squads.
Gotcha.
And that's because the turn meter reduction still works. Jedi Training Array can reduce Darth Nihilus's turn meter, and the expose reduces 5% turn meter when Darth Nihilus has expose on him whenever your characters are using specials. So that helps as well. And the exposed damage is still significant. So, and then speaking about turn meter reduction teams, I suppose you could also run your Night Sisters here as well, but it seems like they might be more effective in other phases, which we will cover. But that's phase 1.
Okay. And then phase 2, which my experience so far, especially since the changes came down, is that, what do you call this phase? A kitchen sink? Is that how you refer to it, Nukin? Kind of?
Yeah, it seems like this is the hardest phase to kind of get through. And that's probably because there's not really an effective team to dominate it. And so we call it the kitchen sink phase, similar to phase 4. You're just throwing lots of teams at Darth Sion.
So at any phase 2 in any tier, what you're essentially asking your guild, I guess, to optimize the number of days it would require. If your Ray resets every day, you can use her in this. But really in the heroic tier, what would be really important is you need to require the whole guild to use teams that aren't required elsewhere, which include things like Phoenix, which is nice to have a use for. They can post some significant damage along with Ewoks. Zeta Maul lead with, what are the other Sith members on that team? Does it matter? Whoever you have?
Darth Nihilus, Sith Assassin, Sith Trooper, those type of guys.
Okay. And then a stealth team with a Newt Gunray lead. Bunch of stealthing characters. Newt Gunray cheese, that's what you call it. And then extra resistance teams. So that would be your Fin lead that you would use here instead of in phase 1, right?
Well, the extra resistance teams being sort of like extra Jedi Training Raid teams, because you can clear phase 1 with about 20 to 25 Jedi Training Ray resistance squads.
Okay, so in a guild at a heroic status, you split the Ray lead resistance teams between 1 and 2, and that's their purpose, is to clear that together, right?
Mm-hmm. And the Newt Gunray team is really fun because you just put Princess Leia on that squad, and she gets so much turn meter. She does like 200k damage on her own.
Oh, sweet. Okay, so that's phase 2. Not my favorite one by far. Let's talk about phase 3 and Chex Mix.
So phase 3 has now become significantly easier for a lot of guilds because shout out to Snake from Republic Coruscant for theory crafting this team. This is a team that if you could get, about half your guild to run, you can also clear the phase with about 25 players. And so this team consists of running a Commander Luke led team with a bunch of rebel scum. So you have Han Solo as well, and Chirrut, and Rex and Death Trooper, and that's the Chex Mix team. And basically, I made a video on it, but basically what you do is you're just setting up the Han Solo to use standalone and making sure that he has tenacity up, and you're applying the death mark, which helps you to do significant damage. And it also helps for Han Solo to make sure that he's focusing all of his counterattacks on Darth Treya and not the swords, the lightsabers. And so it's a quick team that you can do about 3 to 5% of the phase with one team in a few minutes. So it's a very effective team that's hard to screw up, I think. You just gotta have once it gets going. It reminds me of the Kenobi sync. Like once you get going, yeah. Once you get going, it does nice damage. It only takes a few minutes, and you just let her rip.
So does it take a little bit of RNG to get it correct then?
Well, when you're using Rex on the lineup, it's way more consistent. You can save a lot of time, and that's part of the reason why I put him on the team there. For me specifically, other people have taken out Rex and put an extra attacker to get an extra 100% offense, but it really pains me to Gear 12 Han Solo, and mine actually die sometimes, so it's nice to get that extra 100% health on Han Solo so he doesn't die. And also when you have access to another way of applying tenacity up besides Chirrut, can kind of make sure that you're not wasting like 20 minutes trying to set up the team.
So you didn't want to G12 him because he's rebel scum then?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that, since you mentioned you just...
I don't think that'll be a surprise to a lot of people listening in.
Snake really created a very effective team. I didn't realize you needed about less than half the guild to be able to clear that phase with it. That's very, very clever.
It was really nice, yeah. It was very nice, and it worked very well.
Okay. Well, I look forward to running it tomorrow, I guess. Avi, let's talk about phase 4. What do you know about it?
Oh, basically everything, including the kitchen sink. What you do, you've got Nihilus, you've got Scion, and you've got Treya, and this is where you just basically throw everything at them. In T6 or lower, of course, you're going to have refreshes every day, depending upon how long it takes you. In the heroic, you've got to be a little bit more careful about what you're using. However, the fact that phase 1 and phase 2 and phase 3, you've used a minimum amount of teams, and if you're efficient, then you're going to have a lot of teams left over to be able to attack whatever you need in phase 4. The first person you need to take out is Nihilus, and of course, then Scion next, and then Treya.
So since you have to go to, in that kill order, Nihilus and then Scion, what are the teams that you would use to knock out one and then the other?
Yeah, Asajj Ventress, Night Sisters team will do a great job. Mother Talzin is okay, but it seems that Asajj seems to shine in this particular area. In that I have not actually had the opportunity to run it yet because I just was able to Zeta her lead on that. Nukin, have you used that in there? I have not used it yet.
I was going to, and then it got clear too quickly, actually. I was saving them. I was going to... So I Zetaed Asajj Ventress, actually, her leadership, to run her in phase 3, and then the Chex Mix team arose, so I was saving her for phase 4, and then it got cleared too quickly. But it seems like Some
was that pre or post?
Post fixes, actually.
Oh, really? Wow.
That's the power of the Chex Mix scheme. I'm planning on running Night Sisters in Phase 4 again next raid, but it's from some of the screenshots that I've been seeing in the heroic tier. Some people are doing like 2 to 3 million damage with their Night Sister squads, which is pretty significant. And that is nice to see. And yeah, there's a bunch of other stuff that we can talk about as well. It is a kitchen sink phase, right? Because it's the last phase. So anything that wasn't used is going to be used here. And so, First Order is another team. Kylo Ren on mass lead. And, we're talking so much about resistance. Well, if you miss the first 3 phases and you have a Jedi Training Array resistance team, you might as well use it here. Otherwise, it's just going to be sitting on the bench the entire raid. And speaking of resistance, I suppose you can use your Zeta Finn. I did about 500k in the heroic tier of phase 4, I think, against Darth Treya. And so you're just throwing in extra teams. But let's talk about the phase abilities.
Avinash. How many teams does each person need? And also, rather than just have everyone throw their whatever leftovers they have and autoing their way through it or something, one thing I never really understood very well was I didn't even know they were called phase abilities till about 2 hours ago, but please indulge us.
Phase abilities. The first one is Unbreakable Will, and that is granted randomly by killing the side mobs. It's just like this little shield, basically, and that is associated with Nihilus.
The blue shield above their head.
Right, the blue shield.
But what Nukin just taught me is that I didn't realize that if you kill a mob with that buff over their head, the buff goes to your team, but randomly, not the character who kills that one. Correct.
Yeah, because I've always kind of wanted, I thought, oh, wow, this is going to go on, say, Barris. No, it ends up over on somebody else that I don't want to really use the shield on.
Okay, so specifically, when you use Unbreakable Will, when would be the appropriate time to have that be an advantage to your team?
So Unbreakable Will is used to prevent Annihilate from killing your characters. So the best thing to do is to make sure that you're using it right before Nihilus is about to use Annihilate. Now, the tricky part is Nihilus takes an extra bonus action. So he's taking at least 2 actions per turn. But then there's a coin flip that some people don't know. He has a 50% chance to take an extra bonus action. And so when you're combining his reduction of reducing Annihilate and him taking multiple actions, it can be kind of tricky to know when to use Unbreakable Will. But right when he's around 2 to 3 turns before using Annihilate, you want to kind of activate it. So that's kind of what you want to do there. And then there's 2 other abilities, Soothe and Stand Together. And unlike Unbreakable Will, which is granted randomly, Soothe is granted to healers and support characters. And so what that does, it's going to remove the Bonds of Weakness stacks. And when you want to use that is when the Bonds of Weakness stacks are high. And the question is, what is high stacks?
Yeah, what does that mean?
So it depends on your gear level, first off. Taking 1,000 Bonds of Weakness stack damage for a maxed out gear 12 team, you could probably get all the way up to 20 or more stacks. But maybe if you're running only gear 8, 9, or 10 characters, you might want to activate it around 10 Bonds of Weakness stacks. And then also, Avi was talking about before we were even recording was, if you take in a team with multiple healers and supports, you have the luxury of using Soothe way more often if you only brought in 1 character. Now, Soothe has a cooldown of 5, so 1 character can be enough, but, that's a nice luxury to have, I suppose. And the last ability is Stand Together. That's granted to attackers and tanks. So you can use that ability to remove isolate from, which is used by Darktreya on one of your allies, and that's probably the easiest phase ability to use. You know, you don't want your allies to be isolated, so as soon as you have a tank or attacker to use that phase ability, select your isolated ally and remove that ASAP.
Okay, so when these things are used, there was one thing we were talking about earlier where it's difficult to predict sometimes when Nihilus will use his Annihilate because he sometimes will not prioritize it. What are some of the details you can use to avoid that? Because you said just use it at 3 when the cooldown is at 3.
The tricky part is, let's go over that again. The tricky part is that he's going to use his Annihilate when it's off cooldown, right? Mm-hmm. But he has so many different random variables coming at play. I think he has the Force Drain ability, which is reducing Annihilate. I think even the basic attack on the Raid Boss version reduces Annihilate. And then the fact that he has 2 bonus actions every turn, and half the time he takes a 3rd action, so he has 2 bonus actions, makes it tricky to time Unbreakable Will. But if you can get Unbreakable Will on a character right around when the Annihilate cooldown is around 2, you should be fine.
Okay. You know what's funny too is that the Soothe that's only granted to healers, a lot of these extra bonuses you get, you know, like from a Thrawn lane being able to cleanse, for example, or when a raid bonus shows up, if it's not to everyone, sometimes I don't even notice it. So I didn't even realize Soothe was something I could use until just today. So thanks for educating me, guys and gal, guy and gal. Anyway, Avinash, I think we've talked the Sith Raid into the ground. You know, it's not my favorite thing, but right. One thing that I have kind of enjoyed is territory wars, and we did have some changes to those. Can you intro those for us and tell us what's been going on and how it's changed for your guild?
One of the changes that have been made is the defense teams, or the amount of defense teams that each of the guilds are now having to put into the different territories. The original amount was 25, and now it seems to vary between 25 and 35. There's
At
also
20 million, it's 30, and I think the next tier is 35. Yeah.
Yeah. But it seems to be kind of random because there was a lot of lower tier guilds that were having to place originally 35 different defense teams. And that's extremely difficult for lower tier guilds to be able to do.
It's bad.
Because that does not leave them anything for offense. It can create an interesting way to put defense. What you can do is load up whatever territory or 2 that you want to do, say in the front, and have fun filling in some random tunes in the back. For example, maybe a Gear 5 Ewok team or something like that. This is for a lot of the lower guilds that are just going to be throwing garbage tunes places. And you can kind of have fun with that, so long as the opposing team might not be able to get through the front wall. For higher guilds, now my understanding when I had heard about it first was that the higher tiered guilds were supposed to have to place more defense teams, up to 35. That to me is still too much because it still limits you being able to use teams for offense.
That I noticed the same thing in that in my guild, which we're like 120 plus million right now, is that suddenly having to put in 30 instead of 25 per territory, that means 40 more teams collectively from the guild. And if those teams mean something, they're typically the teams that they would be able to conquer something with. So I was under the understanding that only these defense increase margins would be affecting only the top tier guilds, like 140 plus, where people actually have multiple teams they can't use because there's nowhere else to put them. But yeah, for lower tier guilds, let's say under 120 or below 100, 25 teams is more than enough per territory, for sure.
Correct. Definitely.
So apparently, I don't know if the matching system was changed, because there's been a lot of very strange matching where guilds will be matched with someone that there's absolutely no chance in hell they'll be able to get through it. But we do know about
the latest update that they just did addresses that issue.
Have they given details? Because I don't really understand how the matching works. We've been outmatched by, 100 Zetas.
I can speak on that.
Go for it, man.
There was a forum post that stated, I think it was from Ryan, that they did tweak the matchmaking system and it was botched pretty much. And I think they're looking into it. And so I think they tried to improve the matchmaking and they made it worse. So there is definitely some bugs with Territory Wars. And I think with the recent Sith Raid issues, that was a priority for them over the Territory War changes. But I think that's weird because some of the changes were weird because there were some guilds that were requiring, 30 or 35 defense teams. And then there were guilds higher in GP numbers required even less teams than the guild that was in lower GP. So it was kind of off there. But the overall concept remains the same. All the guilds are going to be posting, it seems, more defense teams, once all the changes are fixed from some of the issues that they're having. The concept stays the same. All these guilds are now required to post even more defensive teams, which is really kind of stretching your roster. And so Avinash had a good point about how, for some guilds, you're going to be posting some, maybe you call it the Chewbacca defense, where you're posting.
Yeah, the indoor defense. Ewok walls.
Yeah, and now if you're going to do that, of course, you're not going to want to put it in the very first territory because that's just giving something for free. So you're probably going to put it maybe in the back somewhere. So that's one thing. And did we talk about the new point scoring system that came along with the?
No, let's go over that because that was meant to address some of that with the disparity between defense and offense. Do you want to cover that for us?
Sure. So the extra defense teams, I think, was to address full clearing, and I think the new point scoring system is to address ties. And so now we have a tiebreaker system, which in my opinion is a good thing to have, because not having one means that both guilds end up not getting first place rewards. They both got second place rewards. So now we have the opportunity to have first place whenever, you deserve it. And so the new point scoring system is as follows. So if you can go in and take in a team that can win on the very first try, you're going to get 10 plus banners for winning. And then if you're going in and you're taking a second team to have to win that battle, you're getting +5 banners for winning.
Actually, Nukin, I'm not sure if this is true, but I saw myself getting 10 banners on a team that had already been hit. So I don't know if it applies to just the player who's already hit a team or the person who is hitting it for the first time.
Not exactly sure, but I think these are bonus banners, because I think I recall.
Oh yeah, you're right. They're bonuses.
I think I recall getting 20 banners for beating something. So I think it's like plus.
You're right.
10
you're
banners.
right.
And then
it's the first time the team is hit.
Yeah, and then the last thing is you're getting +1 banner per player on your team that survives the match. So if you can win, this reminds me of tournaments. If you can go in and none of your characters end up dying, you're getting an extra +1 banner per that. And also, if you're going in with less than 5 characters on your team, you get an extra banner for an empty slot.
Sweet.
So 1 whole point.
Yes. it could make or break, the territory war. So you never know.
It could. It's true. If you're both equally matched.
Yeah, never
steamroll from one for the other.
Never underestimate the power of one single banner.
Right. Well, with this last territory wars that we had, I never did any more than, say, 2 battles. So I know that either it got 10 banners or those 5 extra banners for the second time that I may have gone in. Have any of you guys gone in more than that? And what's the total for that? Just out of curiosity.
I don't know. Usually we're wondering if we can clear it or not, or whether we have more. It's not really who eked out that one extra banner for using a team with only 3 players, you know?
I want to say one thing. Even after post fixes, getting extra banners and all that jazz, I think in the beginning, the current meta in Territory Wars is to put some hard teams in the very front. And I think the main goal is to just basically try and clear it. And yes, you shouldn't just throw hundreds of teams at it, but don't be so worried about trying to beat the team from scratch. Just try to get through that tough first territory and worry more about this new point scoring system towards the middle or towards the end of the territory war. Because if you're, just stuck there wondering, can I beat this team, on the first try? Don't worry about that. Just worry about trying to beat, a bunch of Palpatine or Rey or Luke teams or whatever that guild that you're facing decides to put up front, because usually it's going to be quite difficult. So that's what I wanted to add. And the second thing I actually wanted to add is, if you're active in Territory Wars on offense, it's nice to pair up with a buddy and try and work on tackling on offense together, because now, since you're posting more teams on defense, you're stretched extra thin. And I think coordinating on offense might become more common, trying to tackle some of these teams. And so if you're communicating on Discord or something, or the line chat app, and you can't finish a team, post what you're doing and say, I took out this guy, and maybe Illuminated Destiny on BB-8 is about to go off, so be careful about that, or something like that. So that will probably also play a role on offense as well.
Yeah, that's very good points. I'd also like to add one more thing, is that should you be matched with another guild that is particularly out of your league, with the number of 3 million plus GP rosters or Zetas that they have, don't really stress it. Just get one less Zeta, It's not worth the anxiety, but yes, it is nice when the matching system works and you have a team and a buddy and people in your time zone that play at the same time that you can pair up with to conquer those.
That's a good point. Territory Wars were the new shiny game mode, for a short while, but now it's the Sith Raid. And I think all the guilds are focusing on the heroic raid, and then even after the heroic, the goal is to get it on farm status, where you're not having to stress out about whether you're going to beat it or not, and then once you're on farm status, then you're just trying to accumulate higher damage scores and break records. So I think Territory Wars were the shiny new game mode, but I think focusing on actually the Sith Raid is probably more important now.
Yep, I would agree. And, to quote, I'm going to give a shout out to Jordy Mack in Indoor. He said, I felt it was just like pure Yoda-like wisdom when we got matched with a guild that had 20 million more GP than we did, and we couldn't even crack that first node because of the new requirement for as many defense teams as it was. And his words of wisdom were, man, I'll get my ass kicked for 2 Zetas any day of the week. So it's important to recognize that the disparity between your payout is not that big, right?
It really isn't, and I really wish people wouldn't stress so much about honestly losing.
So anyway, speaking of getting our asses kicked, the last thing we wanted to cover was the arena teams. How has the meta shifted? Because, Rey was the reigning champ. EP rework has brought him back and kind of shut Night Sisters out, strangely enough. I don't have
I'm still running Night Sisters.
They still work. They still work. Although it's more challenging, and there have been a lot of anti-Emperor Palpatine lead teams that have been around. And let's give another shout out to Ethan Shocks, who was talking about this one, who's also two other people are running this on my shard, but it's the Rex lead again, who's probably the free-to-play champion, most meta player of all time, along with Wampa, Talzin, Thrawn, and Kenobi. And since you have multiple cleanses, it seems to get past all the dot meta right now. But Rex seems to be making quite the comeback. Are you seeing that on your shards too?
Yes. So there's one or two teams running this. And actually, I can't auto it with my Night Sisters. Wampa is dangerous. He does that big AoE smash, and almost all my Night Sisters get one shot at once. So I have to be careful about that. It's not a team that, is the best, I don't think. It's just another exceptional arena viable meta team. And I will say this, that surprisingly, Scion is, showing up in a lot of arena teams, and it's unclear whether he's better on defense still or offense. What are you guys thinking about Scion?
So as someone that did invest in Scion as a mindless self-indulgence, I have to say that he is the tank that the Palpatine team was waiting for, especially against buff-reliant teams like Jedi Ray. He's an excellent, excellent teammate. Is he better on defense? No, he can get shut down by Fracture pretty quickly. He doesn't seem to be that challenging against other teams that are using him. It seemed like Sith Trooper was the better mirror match tank to use. I am unimpressed by Scion's performance, especially in the new Sith Raid, where you think like being able to use him would be something pertinent. But whatever. He's a really, really great tank under Palpatine lead. He's excellent that way. But on defense, I think it depends more on whether or not someone wants to hit me because they know my name and it's not their payout time in my shard, to be honest. I have no idea how far I'd fall if I changed my name. What's your experience with him, Abby?
I have him at 7-star in Gear 10, and I find him a bit lacking myself. I have really good mods on him, and I've tried him on some dark side teams, including Sith teams. I don't find him really any better than, say, Shore Trooper or Sith Trooper.
I'm still a fan of Shore Trooper. He was the one I was rocking. A lot of people were using Kenobi, but Shore Trooper makes your evader faster. And, he's great.
Shore Trooper's pretty good, but I also find I've been running an EP team with a Sith Trooper. I've got him at Gear 12, and oh my God, he's great. He's kind of like the Kenobi of the dark side.
Cool.
And he can take quite a few hits, and he can give some out too. And plus that keeps my team faster, and it does not give extra speed to the opposite side if they're running the same type of team.
Okay. Well, speaking of which, let's close it out. What are you working on right now, Abby?
I am working on First Order right now. That has been lacking for quite a while, and I'm really excited to get them moved up. I'm also I'm closing in on getting Wampa 7-starred. And
nice.
Got my G12 gear for him and ready to go. I have been using him in the territory battles, and my gosh, it is so exciting. And plus, while I'm not using him, he is out in the living room, and he is an extra rug that I use out there for now. And then I just pick him up and take him with me when I need to play the game.
You don't deploy him? Yep.
So, and I'm also, unfortunately, and I don't really want to use Hermit Yoda, but I do have him on my alt right now. I do like him in certain circumstances, but there's something about a big fluffy white Wampa that grinds my gears, and I just love using him instead of Hermit Yoda.
Wait, grinds my gears means something positive.
Exactly. And yes, it does. In this case, it does. Grinds my gears.
I split.
It's kind of like gets me going.
Yeah, I also did that with an alt and a main where I was like, I'm a gear addict and I couldn't bring myself to stop buying gear from the guild event store with those shiny little yellow tokens. And I was like, okay, I can abstain for a couple of months if I get Wampa on one account and Hermit Yoda on the other. But after that, I'm going right back to the gear.
I know it's still really hard to do, and I really want to buy some of that gear, but I am determined to finally get them both up to 7 stars.
I think it's a worthy endeavor, especially for Wampa. My God, what an amazing character. Nukin, what are you working on right now? What's your current projects?
Bah humbug. I'm grinding veteran smuggler Chewbacca to get him ready to go to 7 stars so I can enter the Jedi Training Ray heroic event, so I can grind resistance filth, so I can post a good score in phase 1 of the heroic Sith Raid. So that's what I'm doing. I'd rather be, grinding something else, but that's what it is. And I will say about the Gear 12 gear, I'm saving that for Wampa shards as well, working on the last star for Wampa here.
Well, you sound very excited about your new projects.
I thought I sounded a lot more excited than he did. He's just, yeah.
I will say this, something that I've made. There's some other people out there like myself that did not acquire Ray the first time around, and we are basically racing to see who can gear 12, BB-8, and Ray in the near future. So that I'm making it more entertaining, I guess, but I'm not particularly excited to use her.
That's too bad, but understandable. It's worthy endeavors either way. Valuable characters.
It's more for the guild than for myself.
Yeah. So the projects I just finished, Scion. I got him to gear 12. That took a few weeks because I wasn't willing to buy gear for him. Right now, it seems like the main projects are Snowtrooper, who has been heavily neglected, which is really sad for a Veers team. And I think Visas Mar is the next project. I really hope she performs in the raid well. I really, really do. But I just don't know yet. I had a Zeta sitting around. I was like, you know what? Let's give it to her. So I'll report back next time we record this podcast, which hopefully won't be a month and a half away from now. In any case, let's close it out, yeah?
Sounds good.
This will be good.
All right, Nukin. All right, Avi. Thanks so much for being here as always. We're going to have Retainer Nukin close it out for us.
Thanks for listening as always, guys. And you know where to find us on our podcast. It's on Nukin's channel as always. And have a wonderful evening. And thank you for listening.
Cheers, sluts.
Cheers.
Oh, God, that was so stupid.
The Force will be with you, always.
And there were, totally no Nukin's harm during the recording of this broadcast. And I tell you what, sweet man, it was, filmed in front of a live studio audience. Here, kitty kitty!